My name's Phillips. I'm the editor of the Post and Courier, based in Charleston. Let's see, the origin of all this. In 2018, we put together a team and spent a year looking at education in South Carolina. We were sparked to do that because, they come up with that annual ratings, the rankings, who's the best and, worst public school systems in the country. And we've always been above Mississippi, right? We've always had that. And then that year, end of 2017, the rankings came out and we dropped below. Mississippi beat us. And it just felt like, okay, wake up call. So we spent a year trying to figure out why our public schools in South Carolina were struggling. By the end of the year, we had this project called Minimally Adequate. It was published over 5 days, breaking down the history, looking classroom to classroom, why was this happening? And we ended it with, some ideas, some possible solutions, and the legislature immediately responded with an 82-page bill and a lot of promises about funding and things that were going to happen, and then nothing happened. So 2019, 2020, 2021, it felt like if we didn't do something, nothing was going to happen. So we did something that we had not really done before. We did some fundraising. We raised money to fund 4 positions for 3 years. With the goal of focusing on nothing but this, the need for reform in the public school system in South Carolina. The result, Hilary Flynn, we hired her on September 1st as the leader of what we're calling, it's called an education lab. And Sara Gregory, who Hilary hired, who's here at Greenville. We have a total at any one time now, we went from having 1 reporter focused on education to, at any one time, we have 6 reporters focused on education. To me, when I think about that, that is a powerful statement about how important this is to this state and to us. So I passed out copies of this Sunday's paper. Hilary wrote this story. It's about PTAs. She focused on one particular school in Sumter. I pass this out to everyone because I think it's a great representative of our philosophy and our approach. She identified an issue, which is if you have a thriving PTA that encourages parent involvement, it can be the difference between a failing school and a thriving school. And she searched around the state. She can talk a little bit more about how she did it, identified one that was working and focused on that. So solutions-based journalism. So we're going to talk for a little bit. I'm going to ask them questions. They'll answer me. And then we'll turn it out to a discussion. So, Hilary, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm Hilary Flynn. I'm the editor of the Post and Courier's Education Lab. Before I came here, I was working in New York as an investigative journalist. I was an in-house freelancer with the Times investigative team, working very closely with their head data journalist to do these very data-driven investigations. Prior to that, I was working at Reuters, and before that, I was working at Politico. And I also got a fellowship with Columbia Journalism School, running an investigative team on a project that actually started a congressional investigation that didn't really go that many places, but still was a congressional investigation. My family has been coming to South Carolina over the summers for years, and I followed the Post and Courier and Autumn's career for many years. And when I was approached about this opportunity, I immediately took it. I moved down to South Carolina. I watched some YouTube videos about how to drive, and now I drove today all the way from Charleston here. I pumped gas twice, so that was me. That's all about me.
All right, Sarah, you're gonna tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Sarah. So I grew up in Charlotte, went to UNC, so go Heels. We have a big game coming up this week, but of course USC beat the women this weekend. So I have covered education for about 10 years now. I started work at the Student Press Law Center, which is a nonprofit that deals with student publication, like student rights, free speech issues. And while I was there, I reported on campus sexual assault and sort of the secrecy around that. And then for the last 7 years, I have been a local education reporter, first in Roanoke, Virginia, and then in Norfolk, Virginia, covering local and regional issues, everything from school infrastructure to recently in Virginia, the debate over critical race theory. And then I came here in October. So I'm based in Greenville, and very happy to be here. It's sort of been a dream of mine to work in a newsroom where there are multiple education reporters, so this is a really cool place to be.
All right, let's start by talking about one of the big issues that came up back in 2018 and that has just gotten worse, teacher retention. So as you've been watching this issue, what have you seen?
So if anyone's been reading our coverage, there has always been a problem with teacher retention in our state. There's a lot of reasons for that. Just the class sizes are unmanageable, the salaries are too low. People don't really care that much about teachers or haven't really cared about teacher needs to the point where sometimes they'll work full days without a break. But that issue, like many, got exacerbated during the pandemic. Suddenly teachers were supposed to not just teach the students, but be available for parent questions 24/7. They were supposed to be on Zoom, teaching, a class full of 30 kindergartners and making sure they pay attention, or teaching hybrid classes. They were putting their lives, their lives were at stake, being in some of these classrooms and doing so much work with, rooms full of people and dealing with very upset parents. We've heard stories about teachers just as people go in and out of quarantine, just having to, be classroom moderators, work in the cafeteria, do anything that they can around a school to keep it functioning. And it's, too much for many teachers, which is completely understandable. And we've always had, as Autumn said, we've always had a problem with teacher retention in the state, but right now we have our teacher vacancies numbers are hitting 20-year highs, and they keep rising. Earlier this year, a report came out that said that there were 1,000 teacher vacancies, and that number has risen a good amount since then, which is surprising because many teachers usually don't leave their jobs in the middle of the school year. So they said a bunch of teacher associations that saw that said that not just the headline number, but that the fact that teachers are quitting in the middle of the year is a massive red flag. So that's what's happening with teacher vacancies right now. It's a pretty dire situation.
You wrote a story a couple months ago, maybe, that it's not just teachers leaving. Who else is leaving?
People all across the education space. Something that we're seeing a lot of too is even up in the upper levels of a district, superintendents are also leaving their jobs. So we crunched the numbers, comparing the amount of superintendents in South Carolina leaving their jobs compared to the amount that typically leave their jobs, and how frequently superintendent turnover is nationally. So the amount of superintendents leaving over the past 2 years in our state actually wasn't that shocking. It was pretty in line with the national average. But when we talked to education authorities and teachers and just different people in this space, they pointed out that the teacher vacancies are going to be a future problem with the superintendent search, because the typical pathway is you become a teacher, then you become a principal, then you become the best principal in your district, and then you become the superintendent, typically. But, you know, if there are no teachers or you can't keep good teachers, that means there aren't future district leaders, which is a big, this kind of brain drain that we're seeing in schools is a huge problem.
Sara, I don't want to give anything away, but you're working on a story right now about student mental health. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're finding?
Yeah, so I've been reporting on mental health for a couple months now and talking with, really the story came out of just conversations with educators, because every single conversation I was having, and you ask them what the biggest issue is, more so than academic issues, they all say mental health. They say this is a crisis. And I think educators view the academic losses from the disruptions over the last 2 years, they view that as a really serious problem too. So it sort of stood out as this really significant thing to tackle. So I think there is this perception that the pandemic, the mental health issues that schools are dealing with now is caused by the pandemic. And the teacher shortage, a lot of things, it has certainly been exacerbated by the pandemic, but I think it's really important context that these were issues before the pandemic. So there was a CDC study from 2019 that found 1 in 3 high school students said that they felt persistently sad. So, going into the pandemic, these were really alarming trends. And since students have returned to classes, the thing I hear over and over again is just how much students are struggling with just the routines of being back in school. There's a lot of just depression and anxiety around, having been out of school. A lot of students became disengaged during remote learning, and just the, ups and downs. I think, as adults, we can look back on the last years and see how stressful it was to us, and, kids are going through those same things. So generally what I hear over and over again is just we are sort of at crisis levels.
Fill me in a little bit more on how they're dealing with this. So using ESSER funds to write some new curriculums, or what are they doing?
Yeah, so schools have this huge pot of money. It's more money than they've ever had before from the federal government, and so a lot of them are trying to use ESSER money to hire new positions, so additional counselors, additional therapists, behavioral interventionists. It's a little bit complicated there because the money runs out, right? So it's a pot of money that schools have until 2024 to use, and after that the money goes away. So there's been concern about not wanting to add recurring positions to the budget. The other thing they're doing with the money are more one-time sort of fixes. So in some school districts, we've seen them set aside money to create calming rooms where students can go if they're dealing with stress and they just need a few minutes to decompress. And then there are also some districts are using money to buy curriculum that is aimed at sort of social and emotional learning. So teaching kids how to process those feelings and how to just self-regulate and things like that. So sort of runs the gamut.
Is this getting political at all, or is there any pushback?
Yeah. So I think there's been a lot of pushback, particularly to SEL, which was a fairly non-controversial thing, I think, until the last couple of years, because it really is just about teaching kids how to process their feelings and how to interact with other people. It has been claimed by some that is critical race theory, and so you see sort of popping up at school board meetings, parents will say, well, I don't want my kids learning this because it's CRT. There's also been pushback, I think, in places where people say, that's not the school's job to focus on that, that's parents' jobs. The school's job is to teach reading and writing and history and science, so stick to that. And so I think there's been pushback to that end as well.
So are they solving any problems?
I think you see it sort of on a case-by-case basis. So Christina's here, actually. So I've been talking with Christina in Cherokee County, who I think has been, one of the things that she's found has been really successful has been sort of empowering students and like listening to students about what their needs are. And so I think you're seeing things like that. I think that the solutions are sort of coming like piecemeal. That's not sort of like a systemic solution to it at this point.
I started this by talking about your PTA story, Hilary. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you discovered in the reporting process of this, especially maybe how the pandemic's changed PTAs?
Absolutely. Well, this story came about because of Sara was observant. We're in the process of creating a dashboard that looks at the performance of every public K-12 school in the state, and we wanted to reach out to survey parents from different schools around the state to see what stats, what information they're actually interested in, rather than just listening to the head spokesman at the Department of Education and what he thought that people would be most interested in. And as we were looking around, Sara pointed out, oh, there aren't really actually that many PTA and PTOs in the state. So I decided to look a bit deeper into that. So basically what I did to start out with was I did a web scrape of every website for almost every K-12 school in the state, and to find out whether or not it had this type of parent outreach organization. And then I combined that with demographic and economic information about the school, like what percentage of the students were in poverty, like what was the racial breakdown of the student body, and different things like that. And basically what we found out was, there was almost no PTA or PTOs in schools where the majority of the student body was students of color. It was very, very shocking. And what's interesting is, a lot of people's conceptions of PTA and PTO organizations are they're kind of, just women getting together sometimes and doing bake sales or sitting around and gossiping about, their students' love lives. And do you think that there's a reason for that? That was what my mother and her friends did in their PTA organization. But the thing is effective PTA and PTOs can completely change and inform a student's culture. The biggest indicator of whether or not a student's going to be successful is how involved their parent is with our education. And this is especially important for students of color and students who are economically disadvantaged, because if their parents are involved with their school and advocating for them and different things, the school to a certain extent must listen. But what we've seen over and over again is, schools that, aren't wealthy, white, suburban schools, they tend to do significantly less parent outreach, and they tend to be more fortress schools where they'll literally have locks all over the schools, different things, so parents can never really get inside. So this is the problem that already existed, and then during the pandemic, participation in PTAs and PTOs declined rapidly. So after I did that fun little spreadsheet, I found schools that did have PTA and PTOs in areas where about over 40% of the students were in poverty, and where at least 50% of the student body was Black. And I started to reach out to them to see what's going on, and I found this PTA in Sumter where they were saying, oh, we have less than 700 students, but for our PTA meetings before the pandemic, 500 people would show up. And I thought, what? What do you mean 500 people would show up to your PTA meeting? And they're like, yeah, they were huge events, but then during the pandemic, we have to do it over Facebook Live and things like that, so only about 10 people would show up. I'm like, well, that's a sharp decline. So I started, I was talking to the head of their PTA, and I started to, talk to her over the course of weeks. I went to a PTA meeting, and what I saw there, what was really interesting is the way they structured it is a way that really gets parents involved. So they got a principal, a new principal came in 2017, and he did this thing where, so the district was already paying for background checks of anyone who regularly comes to the school. So he's like, okay, well, we don't have to pay for background checks or anything like that, why don't we just let the parents into the school? So we started this parent volunteer program where parents could just like, come in, help around help the teachers, help run the school store, just like really engage with the community. And then they redid how they did PTA events where they timed them with a student event. So this one that I went to was timed with a science fair. So you had to go to the PTA meeting and like the school update meeting if you wanted to see, the student science projects about moldy bread, or I don't know, how to clean a penny the best way, like, kids' science projects. So what they did is they had this cafeteria was filled with like 100 or so people. Parents could bring like, members of like their own parents, friends, all the kids were there running around, seeing who could shove the most cookies into their mouths, which looked fun, but, I was, being a professional, so I did participate in that contest. And we'd start the meeting by talking about things like going on with the PTA, volunteer opportunities, things going on to the school. Then we'd like announce who won the science fair. Then we do another update, announce what class was doing the best in the accelerated reading program, another update, a raffle, and then everyone was cheersing, and you got a complete understanding of what was going on with the school. And then afterwards, everyone got to see the science fair projects. And it was a real family event, and they got a bunch of people to show up for the PTA, and it showed sort of how these organizations can be really effective for parent outreach.
So when I talked about the story at the beginning, I was talking about how it's solutions-based journalism. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So solutions-based journalism, so that's kind of like an inside journalism phrase we use, but it also means exactly what it says. So you know how like a lot of times people do investigations and that uncover corruption, and that's so great and it's amazing to expose wrongdoing in that way, but then, and just, shine light in the darkness, et cetera, but then there's like no way to improve it. So you're just left reading this piece and, legislators are confused, the public's confused, like how do we fix this issue? So the idea of solutions journalism is to find like real solutions to problems and not just like some tacked on thing that someone said at, an event once or in like some paper without any science, like actual data science behind it. Like they're deeply, investigated, proven solutions to these problems. And that's something that we're trying to really bring to our lab, especially because while we have a daily use component to the lab, the bulk of what we do is in-depth feature pieces, large-scale data projects, and investigative work. And when doing that, we do want to show a path forward as much as we want to expose wrongdoing. So we're trying, our job is to make education in the state better. So we're trying to show a path forward for that.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and just open this up to discussion. Does anybody have any questions or?
I'm just going to bring you the mic if you have a question. Yes, sir. And I'm going to hold it so we both don't trip on it.
Okay. Sure. I want to say, first of all, God bless you all for being here. And as you know, I'm sure, we don't get much coverage of education in the Upstate. We get even less good coverage of education, and we get hardly any probing analysis of educational issues. So thank you all. Hilary, especially coming from New York to the wilds of South Carolina.
And
God
Sara,
bless you. I'm a former educator and teacher educator. And I've done a lot of stuff with Sara at Rock Hill, worked with the National Writing Project Network here in South Carolina. And a lot of us have almost given up hope, looking at our General Assembly and their inaction, and even this year when they say they're going to raise salaries $4,000, but at the same time they want to cut taxes so that whatever improvements might happen this year, they're not going to be sustained because there'll be less money next year and the next and the next if they're cutting taxes. And it's just awful here in South Carolina. And I say that as an educator who taught for more than 40 years and taught other educators as well. I have a pint night group that meets once a month, and we drink beer and we solve problems of the state. And we're all educators and former educators. And the ones who are still teaching are just counting the days until they can quit. I mean, it really is dreadful for teachers in this state right now. So thank you for what you do to at least shine a light.
Well, thank you for being thankful.
Other questions or comments?
Probably have that one. I live half the time here in Spartanburg and half the time in Charleston. I have 8 grandchildren in public schools, and my 3 here went to nothing but public schools. It seems to me the ones in the upstate have a much more balanced approach and a lot less issues, because y'all been covering what's been happening in Charleston with either the dismissal of the superintendent or the retirement, and I still don't think anybody really knows. And Charleston somewhat, it almost runs a private school system within the public school system. And I've got 3 grandchildren living on the peninsula. They've gone abused an academic magnet, and academic magnets in the top 4 or 5 public high schools in the country. At the same time, all these great schools they have, they're taking away a lot of bright students who should be in other things. And to me, it's a real dilemma what you have in Charleston. You have many of the worst public schools in the whole state are in Charleston County, and then they have some of the best. And I guess y'all been covering a lot of that. And here in Spartanburg, it's almost a total difference. Almost the private school systems are not nearly as strong here in the upstate as they are. But within the schools, you take Spartanburg High, for example, where my children went, it had, I think, some of the best AP scores in the state, decades in a row, but at the same time, it had some dismal statistics. And, you know, whatever you guys can shine the light on why that's happening and how we really need to improve it. But the differences within the state are absolutely tremendous for being in the same geographical area.
I mean, I think that maybe you could talk a little bit more about the dashboard. I think that will shine a light on some of those things.
I think it'd be good if y'all have all this data statewide and all the districts, if y'all ever published it and put it out. It has been there.
Yeah, we're actually, do you want to talk about it? It's your project. I could talk about it too.
So we're in the process of creating a public-facing like dashboard where you can go and sort of look up a school and see how they're performing. A lot of this data is data that the state keeps, but it is really difficult to find and use. And I say that as somebody who's been using education data for years. So we're trying to make it like really accessible to just so that you can go online and just like at a glance see how a school is performing, which I think when you're trying to sort of solve problems, just like knowledge of the problem is sort of like step 1. So that's our hope, is that this will just sort of make it easier for people to understand sort of what is happening at schools.
So can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yes.
Are you planning to pull like State Department data but present it in a more digestible format? Is that going to be your source
Yes.
for?
Yes, it's a lot of state data. There's other.
Yeah, I think it's all state data. And then what we've also done is, because we're aware that, just like academic and even climate stats don't really tell a full story of a school. Like inevitably, like schools with more money tend to do better than schools that don't have more money. Like overall, not necessarily, like obviously there's case-by-case basis with that, but like generally that tends to be the trend. So something we decided to do was, one, we sent a survey out to parents to ask them like what they're actually interested in when we like look for schools for their kids, to see like what would be more like information we want to include that's not just what inside education insiders, sorry, I drove a while this morning, are interested in. And then we actually sent a survey out to every school. Most didn't respond, but some did, that asked them like what made their school special, whether it be like an intense language immersion program, or like a great dance program, or like different tutoring initiatives, or a robotics class, to include that within the dashboard. With this dashboard, we're also, so I really love a dashboard, but you know, my mom doesn't. Like, there's just some people who just will not like think a dashboard's usable no matter what. So we're actually using this data to find schools in South Carolina that, given certain socioeconomic factors, are doing something very well. Whether, again, it could be having a great dance program, or really fixing the problem of teacher retention rates, or having a second grade class that's really excelling in English language arts. And then we're going into those schools and, through deep reporting, figuring out what they're doing, like why, like what they're doing and why it works, to highlight those accomplishments, to use as, and hold them up as models, so people could see like this narrative of almost like at schools in South Carolina just not being great is not the complete story. There are some schools that are doing things very well, even if it's just, you know, this one class in this one grade level. So, then is there anything else you want to add, Sarah?
All right, other questions? This really is a community forum, and the fact that you're here means that you care, and we thank you for that. This is your opportunity for comments or questions, so if you have any more, please share them with us. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I was late. I couldn't find this place.
Okay.
I got lost too, so.
Yeah. I'm a parent peer support specialist, so I work with families, caregivers that raise children with mental, emotional, behavior, and social issues challenges. So when I seen that you all going to be talking about mental health, I said, let me go. So the school piece, when it comes to just helping them navigate, the students and the parents navigate through the systems of care. Just bringing it out into the news and letting people know that they're really struggling right now, and having a hard time finding services. That's been a really big challenge in the last couple of years for just getting the news out there that teachers are struggling, students are struggling, parents are struggling. What are you all able to help? How are you all able to help us get the information out there?
We're always looking for more sources for our stories, and we're very, very interested in getting connected with parents and their children too, because we do want to highlight student voices and hear from the students themselves about what their experiences are in school. So if you or anyone you know wants to speak to us just about like what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, please contact us at any time. I don't have a card with me right now, but our emails are listed on the Post and Courier site. If you even Google the Post and Courier Education Lab, you can find a hub with all our stories on it and everything. But we really welcome any type of, we're really trying to get connected to parents, and especially because the Post and Courier is moving to be more statewide, and our education lab is covering education all across the state. We really want to have a relationship with every community.
Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
This might be, I think everybody can probably hear me. This might be, this might be too much straight to the punchline. So whose fault is it? Where does the blame? It's not the teacher's fault, right? Teachers are in there grinding every day trying to teach kids, so I don't think it's their fault. The administrators I know, I don't think it's their fault. Is it the system's fault? Is it?
Well, I think you know that education, obviously there's problems in South Carolina, but there are issues with public education literally everywhere. So a lot of it is systemic issues like to do with the impact segregation has, like even on, has segregation had that still impacts things today, different issues with economic disparities. But what we're looking at is really trying to find like schools that are doing things well, while also there are, the fact is, like, obviously there are, great school administrators, and then there's some who aren't that great. So that's why we're also putting investigative chops to really investigate the legal system in the state in regards to education. If these people who are running schools is actually doing it effectively and really create change.
One of the things that we've become so aware of, especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic and with all of the other upheavals that we've survived, has been how important local school boards are and how much influence school board members can have either in public or behind closed doors in decisions that are made and influence that is exerted, and in the way that our teachers are having to grapple with the environment that schools end up having. I'm just curious what y'all are seeing as you look across the state, and if that's an area that y'all are going to be exploring going forward.
I mean, we have noticed that school boards are getting, just because they're handling more issues that I guess could be described as like hot button issues politically, whether it be critical race theory type topics, or critical race theory issues, or masks, or just anything. I feel like people are becoming more, people are, like parents and like different people are showing up to school board meetings, staging protests and doing things like that more. We have noticed that school boards are becoming increasingly more partisan. There was just, Lancaster in the Upstate was just trying to make their school board officially partisan. We already have 2 areas that are doing it. And that is something that we're going to, just school board politics is something that we will be looking into over the course of our reporting. What are you seeing, Sarah?
I would say about the same. I mean, you're seeing school boards are sort of like the most participatory form of local government, and so they've always been places where, there's been, I think, higher engagement at a school board meeting than a city council, than at the General Assembly, than at Congress. So like that's not new, but I think the pressure on school board members is significantly greater, and I think we're seeing school board members sort of react in different ways to that pressure. I mean, last week the Post and Courier reported on one school board member in Columbia who's suing someone for calling him a loser on a Facebook group, and so it's tense. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a school board member right now, but there is a lot of pressure on them.
All right. Yes.
I was at a meeting 50 years ago, which says a lot about me, for sure.
That you have a great memory?
Maybe. But Charlie Williams, who at the time was the superintendent of education, was speaking to the group, and it was a public group. And he made the comment before this public group that for years then, in the 1960s, South Carolina, and by South Carolina he meant the General Assembly and the corporate leadership of the state, had for generations deliberately undereducated the citizens of the state, because the textile mills and the other similar corporate groups in the state didn't want a well-educated workforce because they'd be unhappy with their lot, basically was what he was saying. And you know, there are remnants of that even today. And there are places in the state, like I think in Charleston, where my brother lives, and in Columbia, where I taught for a while, and here in the Upstate, that have overcome that. But there's still a lot of places in the state where industry, especially industry with good paying jobs that require a good education, won't go because the schools in the areas are, and I'm talking places like Calhoun County, Marion, Dillon, places like that. Big corporations from out of state, especially high-tech companies and companies like that, won't go to those places because there's not a workforce or a cultural life in the communities either, which supports the kind of workforce that they would like to bring with them or cultivate in the state. So it's a complicated issue. It really is. And I don't think the state's really addressing it and hasn't for years. I think there are a lot of legislators in the General Assembly, and I hate to say this, but I think it's true. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, would just as soon public education disappeared in this state. And I hate to say that, but you know, the older I get and the more outspoken, and the older I get, the more outspoken I am. You know, I'm not afraid to say that. And I've got a lot of friends who feel the same way.
So I think the thing you hear a lot about education, I mean, everyone sort of thinks they're an expert on it because they went to school once, right? And so I think that's what your comment sort of made me think of, is like, it is something where there are, everyone thinks they know, everyone thinks they have the solution to the problem because they were a student once. And you know, I'm 34. School looks really different now than it did when I was in school. It looks even more different than it did 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And in large part, those have been good changes, but it's hard for a lot of people to sort of process those changes and sort of the ways in which school has like expanded in terms of what it's trying to accomplish.
His comment, though, you're totally right. The I-95 corridor, let's just cut through the chase, running from the North Carolina border to Savannah, with the exception of Florence County. This has the worst schools in the country. And as a result, you have zero industry going in, and it's that whole 1/3 of our state's almost like a third world country now. And I don't think the legislature's doing a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah, I agree. That
to
changed.
correct that. And the statistics, the bad statistics our state has, a lot of them occur because of the dismal performance in that I-95 corridor.
That's
It's
right.
been going on for 50 years or more.
That changed some in the late 60s and early 70s when there was a lot of new federal money coming into the state. I had a cousin who married a woman who came from, I think she was from Michigan or Ohio, to South Carolina because the state was using federal funds to pay incentives for well-educated, highly qualified, good teachers and administrators to come from the North to South Carolina to work in our education system. And it made a difference for a while. But of course, the money went away and the progress sort of died with the money.
Thank you. All right.
I'd like to say thank you all for taking this on. As a current educator, you know, you're not really silenced, but you also feel the pressure of, you know, just trying to do your job, get it done, and keep your job. But there is quite a few really easy things that are overlooked that I think would make a huge difference in our education system. And I work with youth in a different capacity. I was in the classroom for 16 years at the high school level, and really just listening to youth, what we teach and how we teach is very outdated for them. A lot of it, the relevance is hard to justify. Like you said, it was it's almost like gearing your workforce. You know, you imagine your education to the workforce you want to see, and what is in your community. I think the other piece is we have turned students into numbers. So we just see data and we forget the humans that we serve. And that was a big deal with the youth that I get to work with, is that I've asked multiple groups in our county, do you feel valued at school? And the high school students and groups that I've asked that to, no one has raised a hand. So if you're walking into a building, supposed to be giving your best every day, but you don't feel like you're wanted or that you belong or that you want to be there, we got a culture problem. And honestly, it's not anything local to us. It's coming from the national level to the state level. You know, what expectations do we want to see? And I think we forget to ask youth, what do they need? And there's all this evidence-based research that supports a child's well-being and how they perform, yet we don't create an environment that supports that well-being, mental, physical, all the things, and it's hard. And I'm also a little concerned about how we're ranked nationally with our data, because I know in my county, we just recently adjusted our grading scale to match other states around us so that our students qualify for college acceptance. Like we were on a 93 to 100 is an A, and we adjusted it to be 90 to 100, which it sounds like we're lowering our standards, but we're really just matching states around us to make our students more competitive, where they do have a greater chance of succeeding. So I wonder too about our graduation requirements and how we match up to states nationally. You know, if we require 24 units, what do other states that are ranking in the top, what do they require compared to our graduation rates? If there's only 15, then no wonder, you know, we're struggling. And the parent piece. I know in my 20 years living in my county, it's a trust issue. Our parents didn't have a good experience in our schools. They don't feel like they're welcome there, or they don't even want to, or they're even in a fixed mindset where, you know, I can't make a difference, or I can't serve, or like you said, it's a silo where that's the school's job. I'll work at home, but it's your job to teach my child. So I'm excited about this. You know, it's one of those things I think the youth piece is very important. You get a really good, clear picture, because they have nothing to lose. They only have things to gain. So, and I love that they want to take ownership in this movement. But I think what you guys, with the pressure on the legislators and really taking a chance to look and put it out there, that hopefully we can see some top-down change that needs to happen. That, you know, a lot of teachers are just struggling in the system, and there's lots of change. There's educators that I work with that really want to make those changes, but we're not able to do that working in the system. So.
One just quick thought, you know, when we did minimally adequate, and I just keep thinking about this as you're talking, one of our stories was about the business community, and, you know, we're looking at lawmakers, if only they would do this, that, and that. But everyone said if the business community will get behind something, then change happens. So if you're looking, you know, if you want to go back to the minimally adequate project to read that story, I think it would.
Well, I think you have to look no further than the community college system.
Yeah.
I mean, the business community has embraced the community college system. The community college system has asked the business community for help, and they're delivering the kind of workers that BMW needs, for example, right up the road here.
Thank you.
You do have like on your sign there, the Intertech Group is out of Charleston, but it's one of the largest headquartered companies in South Carolina. It's a privately owned company. I can't read what the other one is.
That's the Jolly Foundation.
The Jolly Foundation, but y'all do have a lot of corporate support on
Yes.
your fundraising to date, which is funding all these jobs.
Yeah.
A good bit of it's coming from corporate leaders throughout the state.
Absolutely. And that's actually a good segue. Did you have any closing comments?
I didn't know I was going to introduce you.
I have a question.
Yes, Chris.
I never get to ask. But you bring up a great
Introduce
point.
yourself.
I'm Chris with the Post and Courier. I did have a question of what you're seeing in the school districts. Are you seeing districts are forming their own foundations or committees where they can do the business outreach because maybe that's a bridge that hasn't been able to be built because they don't know how to do that?
So there's a foundation in Greenville, Public Education Partners. I believe there's a couple across the state, but it's not a sort of widespread thing, is my understanding. But what the foundation does in Greenville is like really sort of supplement and support projects that the district wouldn't be able to do on its own. So one of the things that they had been working on previously were teacher retention efforts and sort of like a grow your own teacher program. And so for the places that have those foundations, I think they found them to be very helpful.
Yeah, they're kind of like, they're very like effective a lot of the time, but they're few and far between, and they also do tend to be in regions like Charleston or Greenville and not really like in areas like the Quarter of Shame or, you know, more rural areas of the state where you do need, I mean, obviously everywhere you need, you know, great teachers and a lot of help, but, you know, areas where that help like is very desperately needed, these foundations don't really exist as much.
Okay.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Robbie Scott. I'm the Director of Development for the Post and Courier's Public Service and Investigative Reporting Fund. And as you heard, this event is sponsored tonight by the Jolly Foundation, the Intertech Group, and the very generous donors are readers and subscribers of the Post and Courier. And we certainly want to thank them. And we also want to thank the Spartanburg Community College for hosting us tonight. I think one thing that I really want to go back to is the focus of the Education Lab. This was started because we really wanted to be an advocate so that all children in South Carolina have access to quality education regardless of their race or economic status. So that's the baseline that we're here on. We are going to be taking these forums around the state. This is the first one tonight. So it all starts here, if you will. We're very excited about this and really want it to grow. And your comments matter, and we want you to know that. And we want the people that are viewing with us tonight that on the recording, we want them to know that their opinions matter and their comments matter and that feedback matters. It's really a conversation. And I do feel like that's what we've had tonight, so thank you all very much. As we conclude, we do have some materials for you as you exit. We do have our investigative booklet that is on your chair. If you are not a digital subscriber and you would like to become one, we do have sign-up forms for you here. Likewise, if you are interested in donating to what we're doing, we have pledge forms outside as well. And I think the other thing is stay in touch with us. You can find all of us online at the Post and Courier's website. You can call me anytime, I'm R. Scott, or call me or email me, I'm R. Scott at postandcourier.com, R. Scott at postandcourier.com. But we're all here for you, and I think we're all willing to stay this evening and after this event if you have questions or you would like to have further discussion. So with that, we will say thank you very much and safe travels home.